was not the first among Black women in America to change her mind about the benefits of marriage while legally enslaved. The singular message gleaned from the initial 250-year period of Black involuntary presence in this country is that slavery constituted the first battlefield in America's war on African American marriage, making marriage unstable and unworkable for millions of African descendants. This fact must be tempered, however, by testaments of bondpersons' inscrutable capacity to make a way out of no way. In the thick of their daily battle for love, not all vanquished by slavery succumbed to the forces bent on destroying their bonds of affection. Undeniably, a good number accommodated the spoken and unspoken rules of forbidden Black love. But some fled north to pursue Black love. Some chose enslavement over manumission to preserve Black love. Others sacrificed their lives for Black love. And some, like Margaret Garner, killed in the name of Black love. Margaret initially began her northward quest not to kill, but to pursue unfettered Black love, self-love, love of her husband, Robert Simon Jr., of her family, and of course, of freedom. On January 27, 1856, after fleeing bondage in northern Kentucky, the Garners, their 4 children, Robert's parents, Simon Sr. and Mary, and 9 friends from neighboring farms traversed a frozen Ohio River and separated into smaller units. The 3 generations of the Garner family remained together and sought refuge at the home of Margaret's uncle, Joe Kite. Within hours, their hopes of securing freedom farther north were thwarted. As slave catchers and U.S. Marshals hunted them down and surrounded the house with reinforcements. Robert, however, not only had left Kentucky with his master's horses, but also had taken his gun and used it in the showdown with authorities. Defending his family's liberty, Robert discharged his weapon and wounded 1 or more of his opponents, while his pregnant wife killed their 2-year-old daughter and injured their other children as she attempted to kill them and herself. At this critical crossroads, Margaret was forced to choose between surrendering her children to a world of unending horrors or fleeing from it eternally. Margaret achieved a sense of victory in sparing at least one of her children from returning to slavery's stranglehold. Margaret's Black maternal actions can only be understood through the prism of slave life. One contemporary newspaper reported that Margaret and the others complained of cruel treatment on the part of their master and alleged that as the cause of their attempted escape. Margaret certainly had revealing scars to this effect. "White man struck me" was all she said in response to inquiries about what had to have been flesh wounds that left such glaring imprints on her left cheek and temple. Convincing evidence, if not outright proof, also suggests that Margaret endured repeated sexual violation at the hands of her master, Archibald Gaines, or another white man. And her 2 fair-skinned children were believed to be sired by Gaines, the man with the most access to Margaret, even more than her husband, who lived about a mile away from Gaines's Maplewood farm. Although identified as chestnut brown, Margaret, and a Negro, Robert, their children, Mary and Scylla, were described as near white in complexion. Gaines insisted to deputies dispatched to recover his human property that no harm whatsoever should be done the little children, that's a quote, conveys an emotional investment in their well-being atypical of a slaveholder with no blood ties to the fugitive children he owned. While we may never know for certain whether Gaines sexually assaulted Margaret, we do know that with seconds to act decisively and successfully, Margaret zeroed in on slaughtering her girl child first. Cutting her throat 5 inches long and 3 inches deep from ear to ear, Margaret ensured that 2-year-old Mary would not return to the physical, sexual, and reproductive violation awaiting her at the Maplewood farm. Margaret had apparently attempted to kill all 4 of her children on that dreadful day of reckoning. After the family was apprehended, her sons Tommy and Sammy, ages 6 and 4 respectively, were found with knife wounds across their backs and shoulders. And her infant daughter Scylla had sustained a blow to the head from a shovel. However, something telling remains with Margaret's infanticidal wishes and filicidal act concerning her 2 girl children. A local minister, Reverend P.C. Bassett from Cincinnati's Fairmount Theological Seminary, interviewed Margaret after Mary's death, during which she denied any mention that she was temporarily sane. I was as cool as I now am and would much rather kill them at once and thus end their sufferings than have them taken back to slavery and be murdered by piecemeal. That's a quote. According to Bassett, I quote, "She then told the story of her wrongs. She spoke of her days of unmitigated toil, of her nights of suffering, while the bitter tears coursed their way down her cheeks." Another curious detail about Margaret's daughters might help answer the question of how Margaret suffered under cover of night. Her 2 near-white girls and the baby she was carrying at the time of her recapture were conceived during the exact periods when Gaines's wife, Elizabeth, was pregnant and unable to engage in sexual relations with her husband without endangering her and her unborn baby's health. 2 years after the Garner family's dreadful episode, tuberculosis finally granted Margaret the death wish she had long preferred to enslavement. She was survived by her husband and 2 sons. Married bondspersons like Robert and Margaret experienced a peculiar type of spousal abuse at the hands of the slaveocracy, forced to suffer as powerless bystanders at scenes of their wives and husbands being beaten, raped, verbally threatened, and subjected to unforgettable injuries. In an interview, Robert's mother, Mary, who described herself as, quote, "a mother of 8 children, most of whom have been separated from her," confessed that her husband was once separated from her 25 years, during which time she did not see him. And could she have prevented it, she would never have permitted him to return, as she did not wish him to witness her sufferings or to be exposed to the brutal treatment that he would receive. The emasculating shame Simon Sr. and Robert suffered while married to women they could not defend against the humiliating and torturous assaults they witnessed undoubtedly led Robert to the same conclusion his wife expressed: never marry again in slavery. When Robert did remarry, it was not until after emancipation. Okay, I'd like to turn now to the contemporary moment, and I want to read from chapter 4. Although this chapter is on mass incarceration, at this section of the book, I'm concluding, and I wanted to make some connections, draw some connections to the previous chapter on welfare, to look at how welfare policies and practices are impacting poor Black women and men today. And this is from an original interview that I conducted. Scholars have shown that child support enforcement disproportionately impacts young African-American men and has a contributing negative impact on their participation in the workforce. Zion, a Black male high school graduate in his early 30s with 2 children, has struggled to sustain himself and his children due to the wage reduction he faces every month. The state of New York garnishes his wages, collecting $800 per month to pay current and overdue child support. Zion has reached his limit when it comes to navigating the family court system, a place he says, quote, is not made to be there for the male, end of quote. He respects his youngest daughter's mother and calls her, quote, an excellent mom. But he feels tremendously burdened by a situation that traps him in a vicious cycle he is at pains to escape. I don't want to tarnish the mother of my child, Zion explains, because she is very respectable and works very hard to take care of my child. So I don't want to discredit her in any way. But because she was susceptible to getting on welfare when I had my daughter, she didn't want me to put my name on my daughter's birth certificate. She felt like if she ever did move to a place of needing assistance, she would have a better chance of receiving help from the government. I insisted, though. I told her, no, I want my name on my daughter's birth certificate because my older daughter's mother did the same thing and my name was omitted from her birth certificate. I wasn't going to go through that again. Once I put my name there, though, when they're checking the record for the father, he's referring to TANF or welfare personnel, the name on that certificate, whoever's name is there, they're going to pay. They're going to ask, is the father in your life? And how much money does he provide? They want to know how much he provides so that they can cut you even shorter on the money that you're getting. That's why it feels like it's such a big scam, because they want to know everything I'm doing to help out so that they can shorten how much they help out. Zion had always been an engaged father when it came to providing emotional and financial support for both of his daughters. So he actually experienced a rude awakening when he started getting letters in the mail. They were telling me my passport is not nothing. I can't get a passport and my passport is not valid because I owe over a certain amount of money. If you owe a certain amount of money, your driver's license is suspended. If you get pulled over in your car on a suspended license and you have unpaid child support, you're going to jail. Absolutely demoralizing. You're a hardworking person. And so psychologically, what it does to you is it makes you feel like you have to be more selfish so that you can have enough for yourself. The money is going and being spent everywhere. It's like, where's the money for yourself? Talking to Zion left me with the impression that the welfare state functions like a temporary lender that will stop at nothing to recuperate from partners, husbands, and fathers as much of the money it dispenses to the mothers of their children as possible. One of Zion's acquaintances received a large settlement after being on welfare for several decades, and the state, quote, took like 50 to 60,000 of it. It's definitely not free aid, Zion concludes, because they got the system down to a science, and any reported income, any money coming into you, if you put it in your name, in your account, it raises flags, and they will collect from you what they think you owe them. Today's TANF programs create for many young parents explosive entanglements of finances and the heart, cocktails of love, responsibility, ambition, desperation, and despair that lead them down paths of resentment and hostility. Zion confessed that sometimes, quote, it was to the point where I started to hate the mothers of my children. I'm not in that place anymore because I have to understand that money is not everything. Undoubtedly, money is not everything, but it is critical for personal and family stability. And Zion grapples daily with the instability in his life and the disparity between his aspirations and his inability to actualize them causes. The money the state wrests from him weekly, which he knows is not going entirely or directly to his daughter or her mother, chips away at his sense of manhood. He describes how many men among his circles of friends and neighbors share his situation of struggling to work a steady job and provide for dependents. When you're striving to assert yourself as a male in this world, Zion contends, you need to have certain things, and you need to be saving money, and you need to do certain things to be an assertive man. Males want to assert themselves. It's very hard when you can't save money, when you only making something like, he pauses in frustration. Sometimes my checks be like $330. And if I don't do overtime, my weekly salary drops from $700 and something all the way to $330. Now I'm forced to work extra, which forces me away from my kids, sometimes on Saturdays when I could be spending time with my kids instead of working. Holidays come up and I'm not paid for days off, so the money is extra short. If I do get to work on Saturday to replace the day off, I need to be in the overtime surplus category to really make money. And it's like, the more I make, the more they'll take. So you don't really want to work. Some males, they don't even work because they're just like, nah, they're not going to take all my money. And then to know that the mother not even getting all the money, it's one thing if the mother is getting all the money, but it's another thing if this guy is doing everything and he's still dealing with this. So I spend money, my mother spends money, my aunt spends money, everybody spends money to support my daughters. And it's like I get hit twice, double, and it's not a good feeling at all. 35 years ago, Johnny Tillman concluded that our nation's welfare programs needed a complete overhaul and an entirely new foundation. She observed then that over the decades of her activism, each American president devised and implemented supposedly new welfare programs, promoting them as better than everyone else's. But from Tillman's purview, they were only advancing the same thing. In many respects, our current federal and state welfare policies continue to impact poor Black aid recipients no differently than they did during the height of Johnny Tillman's welfare rights activism. Their power to divide Black couples, to give financial support to the family unit with one hand and still take away financial support with the other hand is eerily familiar. Tillman's insight and wisdom are needed now more than ever because an effective and supportive welfare program demands loftier ideas, ethical commitments, and goals to address disparities and inequality centuries into the making, especially when it comes to Black men's alienation from stable employment opportunities. If the government genuinely wants to reduce the number of Black children living in poverty, it will have to design welfare training and employment programs that financially assist poor Black men, acknowledging that most have been denied patriarchal opportunities to provide adequately for their families under the laws and customs of both the old Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow.
Thank you, Dianne, for those readings. I'm filling in for Wiley Cash for this part of the show. So when you read those narratives, it reminded me of Toni Morrison's Beloved and the terrible choices that people had to make. And then kind of the contemporary reminded me of Tayari Jones and American Marriage. And I can imagine that when you were doing the research for your book, that it was very difficult to read these stories that were enraging, and for the people in the past, people who are long gone and that you couldn't help. So were there times that you needed to take a break from the research, or did it inspire you to press on with your mission?
Both, and really, it was tough. I remember, especially as I was working through chapter 2, because I do look at lynchings in chapter 2 from the perspective of the Black family, of Black wives and husbands and families. And it was very harrowing. Some of the material I knew about already. Some of it I was revisiting. Some of it was newer material. But it was very, very disheartening, heartbreaking to realize how many centuries of terror and trauma African Americans have sustained in this country. And so emotionally, it was overwhelming. But I felt that I had to press on and write the book because I didn't see any other treatment of the subject that looked at it historically and structurally and provided the narratives and the material for people to think about in a different way. So it was emotionally overwhelming at times and very, very difficult to read and reread and correct because the details are just so gruesome.
You mentioned that your inspiration for writing the book came from your personal and professional experience, but also from your love of your maternal great-grandparents who loved each other very deeply. And I wondered if you could share a little bit of their story.
Yes. Well, I didn't know them. Obviously, my grandfather died my great-grandfather died in his 30s. And my great-grandmother died the year I was born, but months before I was born. But I have a very, very strong maternal lineage. We're a very matricentric family. And so a lot of my maternal family narratives have been passed down to us. And my great-grandparents, I'm originally from Jamaica, and my great-grandparents lived in the countryside in the parish of St. Anne, the same place where Marcus Garvey was from, where Bob Marley was from. And they were living at a time when the community, I think, still had very strong African spiritual beliefs, even as Christianity might have been the official religion that people profess. So one of the stories that my aunt used to tell me about was how, and then one of my cousins recently brought it up, was how after my grandfather died, my grandmother, if anything happened, if she won the lottery, if she stubbed her toe, she would always call out for my grandfather. Whereas most people would say, "Oh God," or "Oh Jesus." She would say, "Oh Nati." His name was Nathaniel Brown, but they called him Nati. She would say, "Oh Nati." And she would talk with him. My cousin, I lost a family member this summer. We did a huge family conference call after with from all over the world. Many of us are living in places like England and the Middle East and other places. And so my cousin, who grew up with his grandmother, who was my great-grandmother, told all of us a story about how when her daughter was very ill and near death, she went outside and talked to her deceased husband and basically said, "I need you to come and save your child. Your child is near death and you know what's going on and you have the power to save your child. I need your intervention." And she did live. She did live into adulthood, I should say. So they were a very loving couple from what I understand. And she had remarried, and she remarried someone who was abusive, and she got out of that marriage because she had the standard of all standards. She wouldn't take it. And she said, "No, if this is not going to be as good as what I had, there's no way." So that's a narrative that I cherish and hold on to.
Well, thank you for sharing that. My next question kind of folds into a question from Jane of Copperfish Books in Punta Gorda, Florida, about whether when Black men and women have relations with white women and men, if that undermines Black love. And the question that combines with that is, you mentioned in your book about Kamala Harris and Serena Williams and the reception by Black social media when Black women marry white men. And you said you seek to contribute to the conversation from a different vantage point. So I'd love to hear about that, and if you're willing to share your thoughts about last night's debate and her performance.
Wow. Okay. So I would say it depends. If Black men and Black women are engaging in romantic relationships with white men and women because they idealize the Eurocentric beauty standards of beauty. If that's the reason, I think that does undermine Black love, because it's first of all undermining love of yourself. And unfortunately, that sometimes is a reason that Black people seek out partners. Now, in the book, I talk about how this, I call it colorism and phenotypic stratification, how this problem of CPS is rooted in the sexual and reproductive violation of Black women during slavery, right? Black people just didn't start hating their skin color one day. This is rooted in a social, a cultural, and economic system that stratified beauty based on a Eurocentric value system. And that unfortunately still touches us. So if that standard of beauty is impacting why people choose certain partners, then I would say, yes, that is impacting Black love. But one of the things that is very interesting is that Black men marry outside of the race twice as much as Black women. And in middle and upper class circles, they marry 3 times as much outside of the race as Black women. And when we look at the huge OkCupid study, what's fascinating about that is that Black women were constituted the only group that preferred only Black men for dating partners. All other women, whites, Asians, Latinas, preferred their racial ethnic group and white men. So that was fascinating. And so we know in terms of the numbers that Black women don't have as many options for marrying Black men as Black men have for marrying Black women. So certainly some Black women are going to marry men outside of the race, and people meet people and people fall in love and things happen. So that's going to happen too. That's not so much the problem as much as solving the issue of the depletion of Black communities, of important social, cultural, economic resources, which then lead to the depletion of Black men from those communities. That's the way I think we must solve the problem. Other than that, we're just putting Band-Aids on the issue. So yeah, I wouldn't say that that's a problem unless the person is choosing to be with a white person for reasons that have something to do with what I might call self-hatred or self-abnegation or colorism and phenotypic stratification. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the debate, I thought Kamala Harris eviscerated him. I thought she was fabulous. Mm-hmm. I thought she was absolutely incredible. And one of the things that I paid attention to, and I heard some commentators talking about this, but it was really interesting. She was so poised, but yet assertive. She walked that fine line. She balanced the different kinds of expectations and biases that would have been surrounding her at every moment. And she balanced that and made her audience have to listen to her intelligence, have to listen to her knowledge, and not fall on stereotypes that they might readily fall on to evaluate what was going on. She said when he was not respecting the rules, she said, "I am speaking, Mr. Vice President. I'm speaking, Mr. Vice President," a simple courtesy that she was asking for. So I thought she was wonderful. I thought she was absolutely incredible, believable, compelling, and electable.
Thank you. Another viewer asks, as a PhD in systemic theology, what do you recommend we do specifically in order to convince colleges and universities to help redress the derivative trauma you're addressing or alluding to?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I think, and this is a moment that's really calling, I think, for colleges and universities to reevaluate its own priorities and values and It's curricula. So when we look at it, I think colleges and universities need to ask the question, do we really value diversity and inclusion? And not just diversity and inclusion, because sometimes those terms can mask what actually needs to happen in addressing anti-Black racism. So do we really value diversity and inclusion? And where does our commitment to ending anti-Black racism fall within our so-called values of diversity and inclusion? So in doing so, they will have to take a look at who is making decisions in the university or in the college. How many Black women do we have in higher administration? What is the composition of our faculty? How many among our faculty belong to the full professor rank? How many are Black women, for example, right? Those are the questions. And what kinds of initiatives, what kinds of incentives can we initiate to really make our campus an inclusive and a diverse campus? Because what happens in many campuses, there are not enough Black people there to not burden the few Black scholars that are there. So we need companions. We need more support, more scholars. And a lot of times they would need to invest in cluster hires to make sure that they can not just recruit more faculty, a diverse faculty, but they can also retain that faculty. And then there's the issue of the curriculum. I mean, I have had experiences over the years. I wouldn't say many of the students who take my courses, they self-select. So they're already there. They're interested in this. But I have had experiences where I have had students do a total 180 in their political views and their understanding of racism in American history and their understanding of the systemic, how they play a role in systemic and structural injustice. And so I think committing to, which my college, Emory College just has, committing to a serious diversity requirement that really has teeth. And I would even go as far as to say anti-Black racism diversity requirement that has teeth behind it. That's something that will also help to change the landscape, right? Having students take classes that will educate them about the historical experiences of African Americans and other Americans who have been oppressed and who have faced tremendous injustice over the centuries. Those are just some things I would say.
Mm-hmm. In reading your book, you mentioned, I had not heard about baby bonds, the concept of baby bonds that Cory Booker also supports too, that idea of seed money for children that's given in greater proportion to poor children, as opposed to, on a sliding scale. And I wondered if you could talk about that, and maybe any other, because there's another question here about other changes that could be done economically to help create more equity.
Right. Well, the thing that I find so compelling about baby bonds, I say in the book that there are three things we really need to tackle if we're going to turn the corner on this crisis. And the first and most important is overcoming what I call inherited poverty and wealthlessness in African American communities. And the thing that I find so compelling about baby bonds is that it's tackling wealthlessness. It's not tackling income disparity, but wealthlessness. And so every baby, what's very interesting about it, which I wonder if eventually the author, Derek Hamilton, the person who created baby bonds, the economist, Dr. Derek Hamilton, I wonder if he will be able to gather support for this across many different political camps, because every child would get baby bonds. Every baby born in America would have that seed money. But based on the family's wealth, the amount of seed money would be decided based on the amount of wealth of that family. So some children might get $1,000 because they are from wealthy families when they're born, whereas others might get $30,000. Now, I'm not an economist, but I know that Professor Hamilton recommends revising the tax code to cover baby bonds, that is absolutely possible to do that.